And welcome back. So we're going to be talking about wireframes. So we're really going to get into designing very soon, but we're done our sitemap. We're done user flows. We've done a lot of sketching and we have a good understanding of the content and the structure that is going into our product. So now I think wireframing is pretty much the next step. But the big question is, well, what is a wireframe? Now, you may have seen images like this when we were sketching, and wireframe is a low fidelity layout that, serves three simple purposes. It presents the information that will be displayed on the page in a little bit more detail than our sketches and our user flows. It gives an outline of structure and layout of the page, and it conveys the overall direction and description of your user interface. It's basically, as you can see here, it's just like a blueprint of a building, but instead of a building, it describes the details clearly and specifically while giving everyone involved a good overview of the product. It's kind of like that middle ground between your sketches and higher fidelity designs and prototypes. They help you really plan layout, interaction patterns for your users without worrying about distracting details like colors or copy or typography. All those things can really bog down your design process. Another thing to really know is that they are really heavily influenced from your prior work. So if you've done story mapping, you have user stories, if you've done things like user flows or site maps, all these different artifacts should really influence the way you create your wireframes. So just keep that in mind, that you shouldn't just be jumping in and creating a whole bunch of wireframes and not necessarily really understanding the type of content that needs to be there and the requirements that need to be there. So really consult all those artifacts that you have. And if you don't have them, talk to the right people that can get you that information, whether that be product managers, client stakeholders, internal stakeholders. Use your voice if you need those requirements to even start. So why do we use them? Two big reasons. I like using them because they really help to test your concepts and your structure. So they really help you to understand how users will navigate your product. Sometimes you can use your wireframes to highlight certain areas that you think need to have prominence on a page to test if that piece of content is actually working and if the user flow makes sense. So this is one of the big reasons I use that, so that it could be like user flows again, but in much more detail, understanding the different types of interactions and putting it into a wireframe makes it a little bit more easier to test with users to get, better results. The next best thing, actually, I think this is the number one thing, you need to use them to learn. They are fast, cheap, and impermanent. Don't get attached to wireframes. They're meant to change as you gather more information through research and feedback from your clients and from your users. They're a great place to fail, and I don't mean that negatively. On a project, you want to fail as quickly as possible, and that means you want to test your assumptions as quick as possible before it gets to high fidelity designs or even development. They serve as that common language for your team as well. They're complex enough to inform everyone, but simple enough to not get bogged down by too much detail. Now, the little kind of graph I have here is the build, measure, learn graph. And if anyone's read Lean Startup, I think that's amazing because it's an amazing book. But if you haven't, you should definitely read Lean Startup. It talks a lot about building, measuring, and learning. So what that essentially means is you build, and that could be a wireframe, that could be a sketch. You measure it against something, what metric you're testing against. It could be like, I want to know if this interaction works. I want to know if users actually are interested in my product. You learn from those results, and then you build again. So wireframes really help you to kind of implement that build, measure, learn cycle. So I want you always to think about that whenever you're kind of testing with users or just talking to other clients or stakeholders. Keep that in the back of your mind because the design process isn't linear. It's very iterative. So how can we use them? They're useful for three big reasons right now. They help your team estimate the type of work they're going to complete. Clarity and common understanding across the team. They help your team understand what is going to be built. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. It gives them an opportunity to chime in as well if you're presenting to them, and you should always be presenting to them, even if it's just like ad hoc, talk to your peer really quickly. Specs are kind of dated and wireframes can be really much more collaborative than that. So get your team involved as much as possible. The next thing is user testing. We use them a lot for user testing. The sooner you test, the better. And that's the big thing. Like I said before, fail fast. So you can get quick feedback without necessarily developing complex prototypes with all those different types of visual things like typography, color, and all the different types of details like that. So testing with users really uncover like the different types of pain points and opportunities. So this is a little customer journey map. If you've created one at this point, that's great as well, because it will really help you understand how the user moves throughout your product and other products. So really document how your user can move through your wireframes, understand like what their pain points are. And usually there you'll understand that there are certain opportunities that you can really benefit from. And I also I think this is kind of inevitable, but I really like to use these to demo to clients. It's a good way to get really quick feedback instead of like going all the way and sprinting towards like that beautiful design or that beautiful complex prototype. I mean, you got to remind them that it isn't the final design, because you may have a client that is just like, this has no color, or this has no like typographic elements. Like, what is this? It doesn't look good. And it's not necessarily meant to look good. So you need to explain that to them just so they can give you some quick feedback on certain things like interactions and flows and just placement and layout and hierarchy. Another thing about getting quick feedback is that, making changes to high fidelity designs is like really time intensive, and you don't want to be making bigger changes when you're nearly done the product. You want to be making those changes as you go along, and the earlier the better. So that's how we can use wireframes. We can definitely use them to like test. And I think like that is the biggest thing, is testing early and testing often and not worrying about the details. So I'll teach you next how to create them. Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going to be talking about how do I create my own wireframes. So the one thing I really want to stress is to keep things simple. Don't worry about fidelity, especially when you're wireframing. You just need just enough to really get people to understand what you're trying to convey. Pencil and paper is probably the best way to wireframe quickly. This is one of my mantras. Like, we've already done this. I mean, we sketched a bit, we did some user flows, and you've already kind of started wireframing. Even if you have a whiteboard, you can use one. But I mean, pencil and paper are huge. If you do have a client, you can polish them up to showcase some of your interactions or more prominent areas within your flows. And, pages that you're designing for, you can definitely like add a little bit more fidelity to just showcase or demo them. But you want to keep your colors to grayscale. White and black is perfectly fine. Grays in between. Don't go crazy on fonts. Maybe two. You can even get away with one. You can easily show hierarchy with bolding fonts as well, or increasing the size. Avoid any flashy images. You can use rectangles and squares and, an X through the middle. Just say that that would be an image. And for videos, you can add a triangle in the middle to indicate that that's one as well. So, keep it simple. Don't worry about fidelity, especially at this stage. Next thing is you got to ask yourself some pretty important questions. What are the users and the business's goals when interacting with this page? How can the content be organized to support these goals? What should the user see when they first come to a page? What will the user expect to see on certain areas of the page? I think these questions are a perfect segue really into wireframing. And, consult your old artifacts. Right here, I have a story map, and definitely go back to the story map if you have one to really consult like user stories and requirements so you can understand what will be on every page. We even did user flows as well, and we're going to get into that right now. So consult your user flows and your sitemap. As I consult my sitemap, I'm always looking at the key requirements and hierarchies for a certain page. I want to know like what is the most and least important thing that should be there. Different user stories, like they're really great because they're a better indicator of what exactly needs to be built from a user's perspective. And a proper, like if you have a story map, like I mentioned before, we would have user stories for every single instance throughout the product journey. And then we would come together to discuss which is like the riskiest part of the product we want to tackle first. So like for our client, we probably want to, tackle search or the homepage or maybe the initial registration, all those different points where it really depends on users actually finding products or registering their interests. So that way the product can actually be successful. They're high traffic areas and the interactions are pretty integral to the user goal, and we need to get them right to succeed. I always, and I mean always, tackle the riskiest features first. So like I mentioned before, like that's a perfect segue into this because everyone has a different definition of what risky is, and it can mean a lot of different things. It could be features that dictate the success of the product. It could be certain assumptions that your team and client have for a certain feature. When I'm in a kickoff meeting or I'm talking to clients, I have a list of risky assumptions that we have as well. And I mark all those things down. Anything from what we assume the user wants or assume will be a good feature, or certain things like risks. There are high traffic areas that really depend on nailing the interaction in order to succeed for the business. For our client, if we release a search that just doesn't work or the interaction is way too complex, the product essentially will fail. So there's a lot of things like that we need to account for, and we should probably be focusing a lot of our attention on, like in comparison to another feature like profile or a wish list. So always keep that in mind. Another big thing is to bring your team into the process. I mean, this is huge. You should often be talking to every member of your team. It doesn't matter. Product managers for business goals, developers for like development strategy. You can even talk to like quality assurance people, like quality analyst people, to talk about just how certain things work within the product and what their expectations are. Other disciplines will provide priceless insight into the ways you can build those wireframes. So make sure that you include others in your process. It may be a business goal that you aren't meeting or a technical challenge that you may have, like for certain interactions you want to come to life. So tap into your peers. Example of, trying to do things that are way too hard to develop. So if you have like a wireframe that is just way too complex, you should definitely be talking to your developers. I often take a look at Dribbble, and I mention Dribbble a lot because it's a great place to get inspiration and all that, but the majority of the designs showcased there will probably never be built and have never been built because they just are way too complex and time consuming. I'm not saying that it isn't possible, because everything is possible with enough time and money, but most times you want to build your way up to something that is like considered perfect. And we may release in different stages, whether that be like a minimum viable product that has only the features that you truly need to validate if your product has any, legs. Or sometimes we may be releasing on top of that the next best features. And over time, we'll get to a point where we can really hone in on the design and polish different things. But generally, you want to release in kind of waves instead of building out a product from 0 to 100. You want to get like 25% of the way there, build another set of features, improve on other features based off of what you've learned from your wireframe testing and even just basic prototype testing. So remember, loop your team in. It's really going to help you understand what you can and cannot build. It'll also really help you understand what kind of like different business goals you may have that you haven't considered. Maybe stakeholders have certain goals. So these are the tips I often give other designers for when we want to actually use wireframes and when we actually want to create our own. So follow these tips and you'll be well on your way to making some awesome wireframes that are based off of facts and different types of data and are used to actually validate everyone's assumptions. Hey everyone, welcome back. We are going to be working on wireframes and a bunch of other things. In this section, what you're going to learn is going to be huge. You're going to learn how to build, or at least start building and using, a small asset library. This means we are going to jump into some very quick things about styles when it comes to color and typography. We're going to learn a little bit more about components and maybe how to create some more complex components that allow you to, have variants and these different layer styles. So, it's going to be super fun. And then once we work on that and finish it, we are going to work on some wireframes for ourselves. That means we're going to build a bunch of pages based off of our user flows and sketches and sitemap. So if you have all that knowledge that you've built up over the last, I don't know how long you've been watching, but last couple of days, last couple of hours, we've learned so much about user flows, sketching, and sitemaps, and we can use all that information to really funnel into these wireframes, since we are starting to get a really good understanding of where certain content is placed. So we're going to learn a bunch about that. We're going to build home screens, wish list screens. We'll go into even some product pages and stuff like that. We'll build some fun pages together. And then we are going to be using a couple of different plugins this time. So definitely going to be using Lorem Ipsum. So if you do not have that plugin, definitely grab it. That will let you come up with some easy content. So definitely grab that plugin. Okay, I can't wait to jump in and start building some of these amazing screens. See you soon. Hey everyone, welcome back. We are going to learn about components, and we're going to create like a basic button component that we can reuse. So many of you may already know how to create a component, but I just want to do a quick refresher for some of you that don't. So I'm here in just a test file, and I urge you all to just create a regular design file and follow along. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to move around. I'm going to press F, and I'm just going to create just a frame like this. It doesn't matter right now because we're creating the body of the button. Then I'm going to press T for the actual text tool up here, and I'm going to click inside that frame. Here, we're just going to write button label. So there we go. We have a button label, and I'm just going to adjust that to 16 pixels, or we can leave it. Yeah, 16 is fine. You can adjust that to 16 or 14. I like to keep my buttons around that size. And I'm going to give it a medium font weight. You can choose any font you want. I'm using Inter. It's a really great font. And that's it. Now we are going to go to this frame layer, and I'm going to rename it. So you can press Control R, Command R, whatever product you're using, whether it's Mac or Windows. And I'm going to just type in button. There we go. Now, the great thing is I'm going to go over to auto layout. So I'm going to adjust the spacing between items to 0 because we don't really need that right now. And then I'm going to adjust the actual horizontal spacing to something like maybe 24 pixels. And I'm not going to have any vertical padding right now. We're actually going to make sure that the vertical resizing is fixed. And we can adjust that height to whatever we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it at, let's say, 40 pixels in height. And make sure my content is centered. I'm going to zoom in now. And there we go. We have a button. We can go ahead and adjust things like the border radius. We can adjust things like the fill. So we can give it, say, maybe like a nice blue fill. And we can adjust the label within to white. So I just pressed FFF. And there we go. We have our button label. Perfect. And that is everything. Now this button label is kind of responsive, so you can keep it to like hug contents like this, or you can make it a fixed width if you want it to spread across something. So that's our button. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to press the component button here. And there you go. Now we have a component. So remember, if you are using components, they're only available for professional users across multiple files. So I won't be able to access this button from another file unless I took it. This is the master one with those little squares over here. But unless I took this, copied and pasted it. So now I can go ahead into my assets file, and I can see that that component's there, and I can use it any which way I want. And even when I update this master, it's going to update that as well. So that's how we're going to create a basic button component. Hey everyone, welcome back. So we just created a basic component, but we all know that there are many types of components out there. They have components with icons, which we're not really going to get into just yet, but we have components with icons, like buttons like that. We have buttons that are different colors, different sizes. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create something we call a variant. So let's jump right in. So I'm going to make a copy of this component. So I'm just going to duplicate it and drag it below. And here I can go ahead and I'm going to actually make this button way larger. This is like my marketing button. So it's going to be like 56 pixels and it's going to have like more width on it. And then I'm going to create another couple of variations. So I'm going to have a button over here as well. And this one is actually going to be like an inverted button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the fill to 0. And I'm going to take the stroke here, give it a stroke, and go back to my document colors. So it's going to have a stroke on the outside. And then the actual fill of the label is going to be the same as the blue. So now we have a stroke like that, and we're going to do the exact same thing. So we can actually just copy this. Oops. We can copy this instance that we're using and just shrink it down. So now we have 4 buttons. Now the thing is, you don't want to create like 4 different separate components because that can be really hard to just manage. So what we'll do here is we're going to select them all. And I'm going to actually remove this instance. I'm going to select these all, and I'm going to actually detach the instances. So if I right click here, and where is it? It's right there. So for Mac users, it's going to be Command Shift B, but this is your shortcut. So I'm going to use my shortcut, or I'm just going to click there. And now I have all of these buttons and they are not components yet. I'm going to go into this little drop down here and create a component set. So what's going to do is it's going to create this stroked bounding box that basically encompasses all these versions. And this is what we call a variant or variance. Now, what we're going to do here is we are going to look over here into the variant panel. So if I click this box, I can come here and specify properties. And properties are basically the distinguishers between the types of variants. So you can have a property for, like, say, type of button. So that could be the primary and secondary. Then you can have another property. You can have a lot of them. You can have a property for size. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create 2 properties. So we already have one here. We can double click on that just to rename it. And we're going to make the first one called size. And we're going to select our larger one. So I'm going to hold Shift. And here you can see the current variant. Right now, the size is set to default, but we're going to just rename that. And we're going to rename that to large. So, okay, now we have those set to large. And now we're going to take our smaller versions and we're going to click that and go to the size. And we're going to rename those as regular. And now what we're going to do is we're going to click that button again and click the properties up here. And we're going to create a new component property. So you can choose what type of property you want, whether it's Boolean, interface, swap, text. And these we will get into later. These are called component properties, a little bit more advanced. And we're going to go into the variant. That's what we want. We want another variant. And we're going to name this one type. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to say these 2 are the type primary. And these 2, we're going to call them the type of secondary. And there you go. We have our components. Now, what does this look like in the assets panel? Let's delete our original button. So now we still have the same button here, but now when we drag it, you can see on the side that now instead of having to go back into your assets panel and pick new buttons over and over again, you have them over here. So now I can specify that this is a large button and it's secondary, and you can swap between these different variants really easily.
And if you want to make sure everything's neat here, you can even adjust the stroke of the bounding box to whatever color you want. You can actually make it an auto layout frame and stack those nicely on top of one another if you really wanted to. That all comes down to preference, but that's how you create variants within Figma. Hey everyone, and welcome back. We are in our Wireframes resource. Before we begin, I want to talk about the Assets panel and how to use some of the things that we have here. Now, if I just click onto the canvas like I'm doing right now, and I look to the right, I can see all my text styles for things like buttons, body copy, body bold copy, body regular copy, and headings. I can see things like color styles. And then I can even go into my Assets panel and see all the different types of components that are available to me. I have inputs, I have icons, tons of icons. I have content blocks, so I can drag a card like this, zoom in, and I can start messing around with it. Now, before I get into just how to use that, I want to just run through this really quickly. So these are all our typography styles that we're going to just use for wireframes. We're keeping it really simple. You don't need to modify these, but they're over here. I'm going to teach you how to use these later, but I'm going to teach you how to create your own typography and color styles, but this is something that we don't really need to get into at the moment. We have our color styles here. We have our icons, which are all individual components that you can easily swap out. So if I use one of these icons and I drag it out here, I can go ahead and, find a new one that I can replace it with up here in the instance panel. So let me just delete that. Also, if I go over here, I can see all the different components. I have things like buttons. We have icon specific buttons. We have different elements, and these are all variants, and everyone should understand what variants are by now, but these are all variants. So if I use say this tag button and I drag it out, I can choose the type of variant, whether it's outlined or the light version. Then we have this other thing called component properties. These are these other types of properties on the component. Now, you don't really need to know how to create them, but I'm going to show you how to quickly use them. So as you can see, I have this tag selected, and if I don't want an icon with this tag, all I have to do is, use this Boolean property over here and just click that. That toggle will turn it off, and as you notice, the other component property went away. If I turn it back on, it appears, and now I can select the type of icon component that goes with it. So there's a lot of flexibility to all the things you can do. Think of component properties as things that you can easily turn off and shut off. Not things like, changing color or things like changing the size. Really, it is for turning on and off things. So here's an example. I have a bunch of component properties here, but here is the variant property. So I can turn it into a horizontal card. I can turn it into a vertical card. But then I can say that, hey, this card doesn't have an image, and this card doesn't have an icon, or just an image and no icon, and maybe it doesn't have a headline, and maybe it doesn't have a subheading, or content, or a button, or any buttons for that matter. So there's a lot of different things you can do with those properties just to turn things off that doesn't necessarily suit you. And if you can't find anything that works, just detach that instance by right-clicking and going over here. And then you can make that card whatever you want. So definitely a lot of flexibility here. You're going to have a lot of different types of components, different types of inputs, different types of placeholders that you can use. And over here to the right, you have some base components. And these components, if you want to make an edit to the style of the inputs here, you're going to make them on the base component. Basically, these components make up the majority of the components in here. So it's easy to, instead of changing all the different types of variants, all you have to do is change, say, one value. So an example is, if I come over here, I can change, say, this color to 700. And there you go. And it's changing over here. instead of having to change it twice there. So definitely don't delete these, but these are going to be where you're going to basically change the styling of some of these components if you really want to. I would definitely urge you to, keep things really simple. You don't need to, do that for all these different types of components. But like I said, you can just take these components, use, like, if you have a label or content you want to write, you can write them right in the property here and say something like hello, and it's going to be reflected in the component. You can specify things like icon left and a type of icon and icon right and so on. And you can specify the variants as well. So these are the components we're going to use to build out our wireframes really, really quickly. This is going to really help speed up our workflow. Hey everyone, and welcome back. So if you have any sketches, bring them into this file. If you have things like your sitemap that are going to dictate the content on the homepage, bring them into this file. We're going to work together right now to work on some of the different pages within our app. So let's start with our homepage. Now, I have a pretty good understanding of what I want to build already based off of all the stuff that we've done thus far. I know that our homepage needs to have things like recommendations ready, needs to have things like maybe things pointing you towards deals, to buying stuff, definitely categories to pull people in towards, and a really good search. So let's jump right in. And I'm going to show you how to build a quick wireframe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press F, and I'm going to just use the iPhone 13 Pro as my frame, and I'm going to rename this to home. Okay, so we all know how to use those wireframe components. And what I'm going to start it with is I'm going to actually start with the navigation. So I'm going to grab our little toolbar component here and place it right at the bottom. And here we go. So now that it's placed inside the frame, and you can see it right here, it's inside that frame, we can just resize it to fit the frame. And now we can specify the different labels we want to see. So I think there's going to be a couple of different options here. I think we're going to need around like maybe 4. So I'm just going to specify the amount of nav items there. And I'm going to jump right in. So definitely going to need a home. And we're going to need wish list maybe. That's what I was thinking. Definitely don't need to follow me in terms of where I think the content should go and what I think the content should be. I would definitely urge you to do that yourself. We have cart. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select a new instance, a new icon there. So I'm going to use the wish list icon. I don't know what icon, maybe a heart. Yeah, that works. And oops, there we go. What else should we choose? So for profile, maybe would it be under something like user? Oh, there it is. Perfect. I think that could work. So I want them to be able to see like maybe their orders really easily. And this one's really easy. Instead of a home, we should probably use something like a cart. Perfect. So there we go. We have our versions ready. Now I can set this property to active. So definitely nice little nav that we've just created really easily. So that's going to be our nav for now. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into my assets panel once again, and I'm going to start top down. So I'm going to maybe build from the very top here and go all the way down, and I'm going to get a search input. So I see all my input fields here. What do we have? So I'm just going to use the regular input field. And you may notice that, okay, this has a label, but now I can actually turn that label off because that variant has been created. And then I'm going to switch that value to search. I'm not worried too much about like the looks here. Like as long as there's enough contrast, that's going to be totally enough for us. And so I have a little search icon already placed there. Okay, so making it really easy and apparent to search right at the top. So we have that ready. And I think it would be nice to have, maybe some text here. I'm going to just press T for the text tool that says something like a welcoming thing. So maybe like, hi, Leslie, exclamation mark. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my styles. So you press this little icon here in text. So I'm going to go to my text styles and I'm going to select maybe like heading S. I like the other one better. And we can even go into our fills and then choose the type of color we want. So there we go. So I'm just going to do that. And then I'm going to make a copy of that and drag it down. And I think we should do something like, oh, we have some recommendations. Okay. And I'm going to select all that with Command A or Control A. And then we can specify the text. So I'm going to leave the body copy here at like medium or something like that. And then we can set that to 600, just creating a little bit of contrast between the two. So I'm going to actually group these. So I'm going to go right click and I'm going to frame that selection, turn it into an auto layout frame. So I'm going to move a little quickly now. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make this really easy on us. I'm going to set up some sort of foundation where there's just like auto layout. So once again, I'm going to frame this selection. So I'm using my shortcut, which is Option Command G, and I'm going to make this an auto layout. And so here we can, start making some nice changes where we can just like pop content in and out. We can make this the full width and the full height and specify just like the padding around. So say we want like maybe 24 pixel padding on the edges, and then at the top, maybe there's like 56. It just comes down there. And all the content within, we can just select it all and set to fill. So now anytime we have like content here, it's always going to span like the entire width. So there we go. We have like an introduction. Now, I think the next thing to do is to probably have, let's see what other pieces of content we have here. I'm going to go into my content blocks and grab a card, and I'm going to drag that right into that auto layout frame. We can just move it down with our arrow keys. And here we can actually start specifying some of the things. Like I don't want any buttons, so we'll just turn those off. And I think that will be good. And maybe we'll have like a price here. So we can just change that to like say $25, and we can call this like the product name. And yeah, and now we can actually just shrink it as we see fit. And now we have a product card. I'm going to make a copy of that. And I'm actually going to group them into a auto layout frame. So I just press Shift A while selecting them both. And there we go. We've created some sort of like container here, which is essentially just like a vertical scroll, but it doesn't really have a title. I think the best way to do that is maybe just bring in a title bar. And here we can, remove the divider, set this to like maybe small, and set this to fill the container. Maybe not button 2. We can see how like we can just like run in here and change all these types of buttons. So maybe this is like, okay, so we can set the properties, and I want this style to be like a ghost button, and I can say something like, oh, see all. And the title is something like just for you. And then we can take these and press Shift A, and we are in an auto layout frame again. And now we can just specify that this is like maybe only 8 pixels apart. And we have like our own little content area here. So now that we have that, I think we're getting pretty close. I'm going to just right click on that frame to an empty area and drag it out some more. This can go right to the bottom. We can specify that we want this fixed to the bottom. And we can say this is right there to the bottom, the constraint. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to take this and copy it, and it's going to make a new copy. Now I want to make a deals section. And this is where I'm going to start, messing around a bit with the actual card. So I'm going to take these two cards, make kind of like a grid. So I'm going to, select them both, set them to fill. Okay, that looks a little messed up, but I don't think we need all this content. So I'm going to, now that I'm selecting both of them, I can remove things like the content. I can, keep the product name like that. That's totally fine. And I can keep that just the same. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them both. Oops. Let's go in there, select them both, and let's bring them up in size. Now we can even come in here and, mess around a bit. Like this title is maybe a little bit too big, so we can make it smaller. So now we have the little grid of items. Oops. Let's bring this in a little bit, and we can select these together. I just made that copy, Shift A, and maybe 16 pixels apart or something. And these two are right now 32 pixels, but we can make them like 16 pixels apart. And we have a grid of items. So now our wireframes are starting to come to life a bit. I think the last thing that we do need is maybe just a categories page or something on here. Just a place where people can easily come to see what kind of categories I can jump into right away. So here we go. I have my categories title. I'll just keep that see all there. And I'm going to modify this card a bit. So I don't want an image. I don't even want an icon. I think all we need is a subheading. And I'm pretty sure we could just make it centered. And I'm going to select that text. Jump in there again, get right down to the text layer and center it. And there we go. And how many pixels should this be? So I'm going to make it maybe like a horizontal scroll. So this can be just hugging the content. This can be set to hug the content. Okay. So let's take a look at our layers. So we have a lot of layers here now. So there we go. We can remove this one. So I'm going to ungroup that. And we can actually spread it out. So it's something along the lines of this. Okay, so we have these squares now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just, come up with some category names. So I have tech. I have fashion. And the last one, maybe something like gaming. And we can jump right in here and we can tighten it up a bit. And there you go. We basically just created our own homepage really quickly. So we have a search, which I really wanted to bring in. Obviously, I'm going to come up with different variations here, and that's what you should do too. You should come up with different variations of your homepage, and start choosing and testing which one is you think is the best in terms of the content strategy and just the hierarchy of information here. But I have my just for you personalized products. I have deals, and I have a categories page. I also have a nice navigation at the bottom, an easy way to search. So that's it for our homepage. Hey everyone, welcome back. I want to make another page right now. So I think what we're going to focus on at the moment is just the cart page. So very, very important part of this whole app, we want to ensure that when people come to the cart page, they're going to be able to easily jump right out and just, check out and get through the process. So I've just duplicated this frame, and I have this auto layout frame on the inside that's just going to allow me to delete comment, and everything's going to be responsive. So we can do that. And I'm going to name this one my cart. And before we go any further, I'm going to switch this to the active instance, turn that one off. So now we know which one we're we're on. And now the next thing we are going to need is we are going to have to create some interesting stuff here. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to delete this. Now what I'm going to do is, you may notice that like I'm not really caring too much about like the container names. In the final resources, I'm going to rename everything just to keep it neat for everyone. But when I'm going through my wireframes, like I really do not care that much about renaming layers just yet. I try my best to, but if I'm working really quickly like I am now, I really don't care. So definitely keep that in mind. So I have these layers. I'm going to just delete one of them. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this and use some horizontal cards. I'm going to delete this. So I have this massive horizontal card that we can also delete that frame on the outside. So I have this horizontal card here. I'm going to go into this right side. Okay, everything looks good. Make sure all that content's there. I don't think we're going to need the icon on this card, especially when it's in your cart. Like we just want them to get in and out. So I'm just thinking about what's all the information they're going to definitely need in order to, check out appropriately. So I have the product, and there we go. Oops, that one went right outside the frame. So maybe there's like 3 products. So that's fine. So there we go. So far we have the products in our cart. The next thing to do is to think about the content within. So I'm just going to take this container and like just drag a copy over. I'm holding Option down, and I'm going to switch the direction. So setting that to fill the container, all the content within, I'm going to select them all to fill the container. This one, I'm going to have it right aligned. So now I have this neat little thing here where we have both the, I'm going to have like a title here saying like the cart total and, the other information over here. I'm just going to change that to hug the contents. There we go. Because the text was spanning too high. So, cart total. So we can actually bump this down in terms of like the size here. I'm going to just use 16 or maybe 20. Yeah, 20 is fine. And I'm going to come over here and, say this is going to be the cart total of $75. Before I go any further, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a copy because I think I'm going to need this again. And I'm going to bump this size up. So this is going to be maybe like a heading around like there. And it's going to be really dark. This is going to be set to hug the contents, just like that. And there we go. So we've hugged the contents. The next part is when I am thinking about checking out, definitely want to know like, okay, is this delivering to my house? Delivered to Leslie. And the address. So you can do a couple things here. I have plugins that really help with this. So you can go into your plugins and you can go to, I have one called Content Reel. So definitely grab this plugin if you don't have it, or just use your own address just for the time being. And what this lets you do is it allows you, just the free content allows you to, plug and play. So I'm going to go to like a US full address, and it's just going to give me like a basic address like that. And it fills it right in for me. So I have that address. We can actually switch this to a line at the top. These can actually come down in size. They're a little bit big for what we need. They're taking up too much horizontal space. This one can come down in size as well. And this is something that could probably be bolded. Perfect. Okay, so now we have that. And now I'm going to go into my assets layer, and I think we need a big button here. So I'm going to drop that in. I'm going to move it down to the bottom here. I'm going to set that to fill container. And for my button, I'm going to go ahead and say that I want this to say checkout. So I'm editing it right in the properties over here instead of having to like deep click into the layers. And I think like maybe there's like a cart button. I don't know, something like that says like, hey, checkout right away. I'm going to use just like a horizontal rule because I think maybe there's an option here. I don't know. I'm going to put this in and I'm not sure how I feel about it just yet, but I think there's like a way that we can, bring stuff like this in to like the cart to say something like, hey, others bought similar things. So, you should buy them too. And I don't think we need content for this. We can definitely shrink the height though. And there we go. I think this is going to suffice for our cart, because when people first come to this screen, what they're going to see is something like this based off of the height of the phone. And so they'll be able to click the checkout really quickly. And still, if they're, not sure about what they want to buy, they can add more things to the cart. But they definitely see everything that they need right away to start the checkout process. So that's how you create a cart screen as a wireframe. Hey everyone, and welcome back. I'm going to work on one last screen, and that is the profile screen. So I'm just going to, once again, I'm going to take this copy, drag it over here. And one thing I do want to remind everyone is like, when you're working on these wireframes, it's not the end all and be all. Like, we are going to definitely work to, change these to be a little bit more different. Maybe it really depends on the direction we're going to change, the direction we're definitely going to take with some of these different concepts that we have here. But the whole point of wireframing is just to get those ideas out. Definitely a much more quick and iterative way. So, don't spend too much time like worrying about like how things look, because things change pretty quickly, especially in design. So the profile page is going to have a pretty similar makeup. It's going to have like a profile, header. I think one of the things that is going to change here is like, maybe we have like something that is very personalized. Like you have your own profile and, items that you want to buy and, interest that interests you. So maybe there is like some sense of like, maybe there is like a social media aspect to it. I'm not sure. So maybe there is like an image, and oops, I'm going to take this again because it's been really useful. So I'm going to just drag that into here. So maybe there is like an aspect of like some sort of social media. I'm not sure just yet. So we have, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a last name, Leslie, maybe Flores. So we have that. And I'm going to use the plugin called Lorem Ipsum. So you definitely should have this by now. This is a great plugin. I'm just going to generate it, and it's going to close the plugin right after I do it, and generate some content for me. We can make that smaller. And that is that. So we have like maybe like a profile image that they can edit. We can even make it a little bit more apparent. We can go into our assets panel and go into our buttons and, grab a button, throw that in there. And we could say this is like a small button, and it's like a light version, so it's very secondary. And say something like edit profile. So that looks pretty good. So we have like this area here. This probably can fit in there. So I was just holding command while I was dragging that, so it can go inside that auto layout frame. And I think we're going to steal this divider. So sometimes I'm just like, I'm not even using the assets panel. I'm just like copying, different components over. So I'm going to steal that and throw that in there. Now, the interesting part about this now is that I'm going to actually take these. So I'm going to actually leave these here because I'm going to reuse them, but I'm going to take these and I'm going to put them in there. You'll notice that it's acting kind of weird. So we can fill the container and hug it, and then we can specify the height. But I'm going to call this like my interest section, and the content here is going to be like maybe like gaming. So we have our interest, gaming. What else can we put here? Maybe we have another one. Oops, I'm going to make a copy there, throw it in there, and put to hug the content. This is where we can, jump inside here and, essentially delete some of the content that's in here, because it's kind of confusing. So we have our frame, and I'm just going to set this to fill. And I'm going to create another one that's in there. So now I have two. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm going to select these two and make them like more squared. And over here, what I'm going to do is I am going to set this to like maybe reading. I mean, I personally love to read. And we have, I don't know, sports. And there we go. So we have like an interest section. And I'm thinking, maybe they can come in here and they can see all their interests, and, it'd be a quick way to go ahead and, like see those interests, edit those interests, and so on. So I'm going to make a duplicate and drag that down. And now we have another section here. Now I think this is where they can get, another maybe deep dive into their account. So maybe it's like account details. And over here we have things like your orders. And then we have other things like buy again. And okay, maybe wish lists. So definitely some things here that we could use from the other part, like how we just drag those components over. But there we go. Like we've created a pretty simple profile page just by like throwing in some quick components and, staying true to what our goal is for this app. We want to make a personalized app for shopping, as personalized as it possibly can get. And now we've, started exploring maybe this idea of having like a profile that, other people can maybe access. I'm not sure just yet. Maybe that's like a post-launch feature or something that we don't really build in right away, and it's more of like an account screen. But lots of different strategies can come out from, just simple wireframing. And that's how you create wireframes within Figma.